Other comments or questions on health care? See if I can find this. Yeah.
I think it's completely wrong for them to make it to where I have to buy it. If I don't want it, I don't want to buy it. I don't need it.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you forcing me to? It's like I had to get in my car and immediately put my seatbelt on, or I get pulled over and get fined. Why do you care if I wear my seatbelt? I kind of feel like the same thing. Why do you care if I have the health care? Because you want to make the money? And they already failed at Social Security. What makes them think that they can do this health care thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. Anyone have thoughts on that? What if I don't want it? Well, what would be the counter argument to that?
Who's going to pay for your medical bills when you end up in the hospital?
Yeah, the government forces hospitals to pay for emergency medical care. So the idea is that if you don't have insurance, you're going to go to the emergency room. You're not going to have insurance, and then who's going to pick up the bill? Well, the hospital. And then who pays for the hospital? Well, the patients. And so they're all the idea is they're going to pay for it one way or another. So that would be the counter argument. Yeah.
One of these articles that you posted, the Whole Foods alternative to Obamacare, I really liked how it very simply laid out different things that just seem so logical that need to change, that need to happen to save money in the whole healthcare industry. And they're so, I mean, they just seem ridiculously basic. Why isn't the focus here instead of in this Obamacare that, frankly, I think most of America doesn't really understand. They don't understand the ramifications. It's too big, it's too complicated. And the reasons why they say yay or nay, that they think it's great, is whoever is surrounding them, whatever they're listening to on TV or their friends, or they really don't have the facts. They really don't realize what it's going to do.
Yeah, it sounds really good when you say it. Hey, we're the most affluent country in America, and what basic function of government is to take care of its people. I remember there was some guy with long hair, like in a ponytail, in one of the Clinton, the first or second Clinton, I think it was the first Clinton election, 1992, and he talked about the government is our parent, and we're its children, and shouldn't a parent take care of its children? And a lot of people have a model of government as a kind of either a stern father figure that keeps you in line, the sort of police state type people that says the government should tell you how to lead your life and make sure you're not doing something you're not supposed to. And then there's the kind of nanny state people that says the government should be more like your mother, and it should be wiping your nose and taking care of you and making sure you put on your coat before you go outside to play, and those sorts of things. But when you think about, as an adult, mature adult, as an independent person, either whether it's the soft motherly figure or the stern fatherly figure, they're still telling you how to live your life, and the idea that they should provide for you. You might have had one of your parents tell you, as long as you live under my roof, you play by my rules. Well, think about that. So you get out of the house, you're like, I'm tired of this. I'm going to be on my own. I'll pay my own bills, and then I can live my life as I want to, right? Not so fast, because you get away from your biological mother and father, but then there's, Uncle Sam and, I don't know what the motherly alternative would be. I guess that he doesn't have does Uncle Sam have a consort? Yeah, just right. Yeah, I suppose right. So, but you have the government acting as your parent and telling you what to do and saying, hey, I provide for you, but as a condition of that, you're gonna have to follow all these rules, and you're under the government rules now, and you have to take it or leave it. And now some people have said, oh well, look, just if you don't like it, America, love it or leave it. If you don't like it, take a hike. It used to be like conservatives would say that to liberals or when they were in power. They said, America, love it or leave it. It sounds like sort of, kind of like a kind of mean conservative thing to say, right? But now I hear this, a lot of liberals that are supposed to be tolerant and loving and inclusive say, hey, if you don't like it, you can leave the country. Well, Well, that assumes that you can go someplace else where things aren't worse, right? But every other, I mean, America is now we're sunk down. I think we're number 10 on economic freedoms if you care about those. So who's on top of us? New Zealand, Singapore, Hong Kong, Australia, all economically freer than the U.S. Social freedoms in those places, Singapore, pretty lousy. But New Zealand, Australia, about the same as here. So if you think but try to get into New Zealand, try to get in Australia. Immigration into those countries, it's tougher to get in those places than it is the U.S. Because everybody wants to go there. Why? Because they have a great economy. Because their currency is still worth something. They don't have massive debt and deficit. So and they got nice weather and sandy beaches too. So anyway, that's my take on the love it or leave it. This idea of the social contract, I think we'll be talking about later in the class. What do you think about this idea that I hear this a lot of times from students or professors? Oh, aren't you part of the social contract? Well, somebody tell me what is this idea of the social contract? Where does it come from? Anybody take Stan Taylor's poli-sci classes, or maybe who's heard of this idea of the social contract? Anybody? Wow. Okay, a few people. Wow, that's really surprising. So the idea of the social contract is that there's an implied agreement between the individual and the state, such that as long as the individual remains under the state's jurisdiction in the area where the state operates, they have certain obligations to the state. And the state, in turn, provides certain things for the individual. And so this goes back to, I guess, you can find it in Plato. Socrates gets a chance to escape from prison. He's been condemned to die. This is in the Crito. And so Socrates is condemned to die. He's been convicted of corrupting the youth and some other charges, and he's been given the death penalty. And his friends come in and say, "All right, Socrates, we've bribed the guards. Let's get out of Dodge. Let's find some other place to go." And Socrates says, what kind of person would I be if after the state took care of me all my life and its laws protected me and the army protected me and I have all these great public buildings and a place to live and an economy and it fed me and clothed me and so on, if I were just to run away when I didn't like the outcome of a trial that it put on? And he says, and so he implies that he has this obligation to take his medicine, so to speak, the hemlock. Why? Because he benefited from the state, and therefore he has to abide by the state's rules. You get this later on in the philosopher Thomas Hobbes talks about this. And his idea is just that people get together and say, hey, we want law and order. We don't want to have to walk around in fear for our lives. Let's have a king and nobility, and they'll keep the highway. They'll hang the highwaymen, and they'll keep away the roving nomads, and they'll keep the Muslim hordes at bay, and the idea is that the government provides safety and security. In turn, what do you got to do? Well, you got to not break the laws. You can't steal and rob and kill, and you got to pay your taxes to pay for the soldiers, and so it's basically this sort of idea of law and order, that you benefit from the protection of the state, therefore you get to pony up some money and abide by the state's laws. Now you get somebody like Rousseau, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He comes up with this really beefy version of the social contract, where it's not just about safety and security like Hobbes, and it's not a monarchy anymore. It's a democracy, and his idea is that you owe a whole lot to the state. The state does all this stuff for you, and so therefore you owe your allegiance to the state, and you have to follow its rules. And so again, it's an implied agreement. It's not like a formal written agreement, because you don't sign anything, right? It's not an actual literal contract, but it's this idea that there's this relationship between the individual and the state, that just by staying, you agree to follow the state's laws. Yeah.
I was curious what you meant by allegiance. Does that mean like patriotism and things like that, or does that mean like signing up for the army, or does that mean like supporting your country with like taxes?
I think it means so it means paying taxes and following the laws, whatever they are. And if you don't like the laws, you can go and vote and hope to convince enough people to pass laws that you like and not pass laws that you don't like. And when you think about all the laws that get passed every year, the idea that you could like have any, particularly in this system right there, maybe at the time Rousseau was around, you might have had a shot at it. But when you're dealing with a nation of 300 million people or states of 2 or 3 million people, just keeping track of all the state laws is a full-time job of several people. Keeping track of the federal laws is impossible. As a matter of fact, there's an act right now called the Read the Bills Act. And in the Read the Bills Act, it requires every law to be read in the congressional record before it's called to a vote. What do you think about that idea? Seem reasonable? Seem crazy? Yeah.
Well, nowadays, from what I understand, there's a whole bunch of things tacked on to a lot of laws that they basically produce. Like, we're going to say that we're outlawing smoking in, say, these areas, and then there's tacking on a bunch of other little add-ons to it.
Mm-hmm.
So reading each one out loud, especially when some of them, from what I understand, is like 5 or 10 pages long, like who's going to remember the beginning by the time you get to the end, or who's going to remember, clause number C117X from second section, blah.
Right.
And
So,
they're not longer than 5 or 10 pages, most of them too.
yeah, so that you get these omnibus spending bills and these major pieces of legislation like Obamacare. And, it's over 1,000 pages long. I think the statutes you end up with 24,000 pages, something like that. And so you have a 24,000 page bill, and now consider that that's just the bill. Once the bill is passed, you have regulatory agencies who have to implement the language of the bill. And so they generate, for every page in the bill, there could be generated 7, 8, 9, 10 pages of regulations that have to be complied with. And so you could basically spend your whole life just trying to keep up with just reading the laws, assuming you can make sense out of them. And they're written in technical, legalistic language. And so the Read the Bills Act is really from people that want to, reduce the number of laws that are passed every year and make them in ordinary, understandable language. But I doubt that Congress would pass something like that.
I don't even think that a lot of the people in Congress would understand it anyway, because it's in such legalistic, writing. That, a lot of them, they're pretty educated people, but a lot of them don't have law degrees that can, understand what they're talking about. I've read a little stuff on it, like some of the stuff in there. It's like it's gibberish.
Right? Yeah, it is.
For the
It's
average
it's like Greek.
Yeah.
There's even a clip of John Conyers, Democrat congressman, and he says, all these people, they say, read the bills. It's like, you read this stuff, you don't know what it's saying. And so, yeah, but they're voting on those bills, even though they don't understand what's in them. I think Nancy Pelosi said about the Obamacare bill, she said, we need to pass the bill so you can see what's in it. I was thinking, pass the bill. Shouldn't you know what's in the bill before you vote on it? Yeah.
Yeah, and it almost makes me wonder if we should be voting for their aides that interpret the bills, read the bills, and tell them what it supposedly says. Because those are people that are hired. We don't vote for them, but that's really.
And who else writes these bills? Well, you get lobbyists that put suggestions to the aides, and then the aides incorporate them in the bills, and you get people making amendments in the House and the Senate. And this is coming out of special interest groups. It's coming out of these pressure groups, corporations. And, along with the suggestion for a certain provision, there's usually, a few days later, maybe a month later, just so it doesn't look suspicious, a little campaign donation. And so it's not as if people are sitting in a room thinking, what's best for the American people? No, they want to get elected next time. And so watching legislation be made is sort of like watching sausage get made. It's a pretty pretty ugly process. At least with sausage, the end result tastes pretty good. Even though it's going to kill you, it tastes good at least. So here I found this second clip here. Okay. You get the president here. So this is after the Supreme Court hearings on the bill. So what happened was there have been several court challenges to the health care legislation that was passed in 2010. And the whole name of this thing is the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act. Right? They always have these really nice sounding names. So, but Obamacare is the name that everybody uses for it. It's just like welfare reform. I don't know what welfare reform had some long bill, but they just called it welfare reform. So this is the Patient Affordable Care Act, Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. And there were several lower court challenges. Finally, I got kicked up to the Supreme Court, and they had oral arguments, and the government did a pretty awful job in presenting, didn't really seem prepared, and just didn't make very good arguments, such as they are. And so based on the disposition of the judges, Obama seems worried that it's not going to pass. So he's making remarks, I think the same or the next day about it, and so during the questioning, they're not recording or televising this or anything, but you have reporters in the room, and they're talking about like the hard questions that the Justices ask, particularly the conservative justices, and the fact that they're asking a lot of hard questions. It looks like the conservative, well, the four conservatives and the one moderate candidate seem to be leaning against it. So here's the president's reaction. Oh, let me.
With respect to healthcare, I'm actually continue to be confident that the Supreme Court will uphold the law. And the reason is because, in accordance with precedent out there, it's constitutional. Ultimately, I'm confident that the Supreme Court will not take what would be an unprecedented, extraordinary step of overturning a law that was passed by a strong majority of a democratically elected Congress.
Okay. So any thoughts on that?
He's basically saying that the Supreme Court doesn't overturn stuff that's passed, basically, right? And that's what the whole thing was behind it.
Yeah, it seems like, isn't that what the Supreme Court does?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this goes back to talking about precedent. There was a famous Supreme Court case, Marbury versus Madison, if anybody's heard of that. And it basically established that the Supreme Court, can rule laws passed by Congress unconstitutional, that they're the final arbiter of that. And so in Marbury versus Madison, the Supreme Court, first asserted its right to find laws unconstitutional. And it's pretty clear in the Constitution that's what they're intended for as a check against legislative power. So the idea of a constitution is to give government a certain amount of stability, to guarantee certain absolute rights, particularly rights of minorities, and make sure that they're protected, and be a check on government power. And so he said it would be unprecedented, where you can think about, Brown versus Board of Education, which integrated the schools. I'm sure the president wouldn't have a problem with that. That was the Supreme Court striking down laws. Lawrence v. Texas, which said that sex between consenting adults was an absolute right to privacy, and it abolished all the state laws against homosexual activity and other laws against certain kinds of sexual activities between consenting adults in private. It said that all those laws are unconstitutional, all those state laws. Roe versus Wade struck down most of the abortion laws. And so the Supreme Court does this fairly regularly. And so anything else about the President's statement that seemed interesting or remarkable? Anybody know how the healthcare law passed? Was it close? Was it bipartisan? Or how was the healthcare law passed? How many Republicans voted for it, do you think?
One.
Well, I suppose it depends on whether you think Arlen Specter's a Republican. I think I got no Republican votes. You had a Republican that turned into an independent, I think. So I think it actually passed with no Republican votes, and it was pretty close in the House. It was like 219. I had the figures up here. Now I lost them here, but it was very close in the House. The Senate, there's a Democrat majority there. No Republican votes in the Senate, so it was 60 to 39. But you think about, was that really like a significant majority? It seems like that's sort of people split down the middle, straight down party lines, and so that's another thing, that maybe a little nitpick, that is this very controversial bill. They had to buy off a lot of the Democratic holdouts. So there's what they call the Louisiana Purchase, where President Obama offered some federal benefits to sweeten the deal for a representative from Louisiana.
Yeah.
His Mary Landrieu. And then there was there was another one too. The corn husker kickback. So there was a senator from Nebraska who also got something to sweeten the deal for him because he was vacillating. So, I mean, it was a really, really controversial, really hard to get through. And then they had to use the reconciliation process, which is almost never used it's never used for a major piece of legislation. There's some question about the constitutionality there. So they had to use some funny procedural rules to prevent a filibuster in the Senate. So anyhow, so I think on two counts, one, it wasn't passed by wide majorities, and second of all, the Supreme Court overturning a law is nothing new and certainly unprecedented. Yeah.
He also, matter of factly, declared that it was constitutional, which is highly debatable.
Yeah. So what might be unconstitutional about the Patient Protection Affordable Care Act?
You don't have a choice.
What's that?
You don't have a choice. Really, I mean, you take the fine, I guess, but.
Yeah. So is there anything in the Constitution that says that you can't be forced to do something you don't want to do? Pay taxes, that's in the Constitution. They have the right to levy taxes. Used to be a draft, that was found to be constitutional. Yeah, so there's no specific provision. So what, if you think about the Constitution, if you had to pick an amendment of like say the 10, the Bill of Rights, is there one that jumps out at you? You guys, do they teach the Constitution in like high school? So there's this amendment called the 10th Amendment. So the 10th Amendment, anybody know what the 10th Amendment says? It says that those powers not specifically given to the federal government, it cannot exercise. That these belong either to state governments or to the people. And by that I think it just means the local governments. And so, so the 10th Amendment was argued against on the grounds that it was superfluous, because I think it was James Madison that said, well, of course, when you write a constitution and you lay out the enumerated powers of the federal government and say the federal government has the right to do this, the right to do that, the right to do that, if you don't say it has the right to do it, then of course it can't do it. But Jefferson, I think, was smart enough to say, hey, no telling what they're going to do. Might as well put it in just to be safe. So the 10th Amendment prohibits the federal government from going beyond its enumerated powers. And so the question is medical care one of the powers given to the federal government? And you look there in the Article 1, Section 8, it lays out all the powers of the federal government. The power to levy taxes, the power to raise an army, the power to coin money. By the way, it says gold and silver, except for it says the states can't make anything but gold and silver money, but it doesn't say anything about the federal government. Oops. Oh, it does. It's got some stuff about letters of credit there, but we'll get to that later. Post office, that's in the Constitution, surprisingly. And so you have the power to conduct diplomacy with foreign nations. And so originally federal laws, you just had like a handful of them, and they were about like treason and counterfeiting. Why? Because what does the government do? It it provides common currency for the states, and it provides national defense, and those are the main functions, and some infrastructure. So think about the post office as the 18th century version of the internet, right? So communication. And commerce and regulating commerce and engaging in diplomacy with foreign nations, and that was pretty much it. Yeah.
So isn't that one of the arguments for the legalization of certain drugs?
Mm-hmm.
The 10th Amendment.
Yeah. Where's the regulating of drugs in the Constitution? If you think about it, think about alcohol prohibition. How did they get that passed? The 18th Amendment, I think, right? So they had to actually amend the Constitution. Why? Because it wasn't in the Constitution. So in order to give Congress a new power over alcohol, they had to amend the Constitution. But they didn't amend the Constitution when they prohibited, marijuana and starting like in the I guess the 20s or 30s maybe, cocaine and those things. So yeah, so the same thing here. So that's one of the arguments. The argument against about the individual mandate is that it's not really an authority that Congress has. Now, there's a funny thing here that went on, that early on when they were trying to get this passed, they said it's not, if you don't have insurance, you're not going to pay a tax, you're paying a fine. It's not a tax, because people don't like taxes, right? So they said there will be no taxes. You'll be able to afford health insurance. You'll have to buy it, but there'll be a bunch of subsidies. And if you don't do it, we're going to give you the fine. And so you say fine, and people in Congress say, okay, well, as long as I'm not on record as raising taxes to pass some bill, I'm good, so I'll vote for it. So in order to get it passed, they said no new taxes, only a little fine. Once it's passed, now they're arguing before the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court says, well, where's your power to make people buy health insurance? And they say, well, it's, and then what about this fine? They say, oh, no, that's not a fine, it's a tax. And that's in the Constitution. It says that Congress could tax. So they did the switcheroo after it was passed. Now they're trying to get it to pass legal stricture, and now suddenly what before was a fine is now they're trying to present it as a tax. Or they were trying to present it, and I think not very successfully. I think those are the main objections to Obamacare. And who's to know what the Supreme Court will ultimately decide? I think they've already voted and decided, but they're writing their opinions now, and it takes several months, so we'll find out in June whether Obamacare will live or die, and whether they're going to just strike down a portion of the law or the whole thing. So they might just get rid of the individual mandate and keep the rest of it, or keep certain provisions of it, like the pre-existing condition reason or something. So we're way past our break, so after the break it'll be a review for the first exam.